Reprise du débat. Resuming debate. L'honorable député de Westmount, Ville-Marie.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je partagerai mon temps aujourd'hui avec ma collègue, la députée de Vancouver-Quadra. La question que nous débattons aujourd'hui, devrions-nous envoyer nos militaires en Irak pour une mission de combat? Nous devons tous, en tant que députés, faire une analyse en profondeur des enjeux devant nous avant de prendre une décision éclairée et extrêmement sérieuse sur cette question. Les conséquences de notre décision seront énormes et de longue durée. Nous parlons d'aller en guerre. Inutile de le dire, les 308 députés de cette Chambre vivront avec les conséquences de cette décision par vote que nous prendrons bientôt. Let me start by saying that there are many points in the government's motion with which the Liberal Party agrees. The evil that is ISIL, the need for a broad coalition to take on ISIL, the need to provide far greater humanitarian assistance to the million-plus victims displaced by the advance of ISIL, the need for Canada to contribute to the coalition. No party can claim the high ground in condemning ISIL. We all forcefully condemn this abhorrent, barbaric group of terrorists. None of that is open to question. The question is, what should Canada do in order to contribute in the best possible manner to the collective effort to defeat ISIL? When that question is posed, there is a fundamental and consequential second question that follows. Should we contribute to a combat or a non-combat mission? That's what we're debating today. Let me say from the outset, the Prime Minister has failed to make a clear case for a Canadian combat role in Iraq at this time. The Prime Minister is taking us across the Rubicon by deciding on a combat mission. Once a country makes that decision, there is no turning back the clock. Quand le gouvernement a annoncé la première mission en Irak, l'envoi de soldats des forces spéciales pour aviser et former les forces kurdes, mon parti a donné son appui. Nous reconnaissions clairement le besoin de faire quelque chose pour venir en aide à l'Irak. Nous croyons à la doctrine de la responsabilité de protéger qui reconnaît plusieurs différentes façons qu'un pays peut contribuer au-delà d'une mission de combat afin de protéger les citoyens d'un autre pays. Ayant moi-même visité la région kurde de l'Irak en début de septembre, j'ai pu obtenir une idée de la complexité du défi militaire ainsi que de l'ampleur de la catastrophe humanitaire. Le Canada ne peut pas ne rien faire. Il faut contribuer, non seulement beaucoup plus que le 29 millions déjà envoyés en aide humanitaire, mais aussi en aidant d'autres façons. Et je suis très heureux de savoir que le gouvernement vient de fournir une nouvelle contribution de 10 millions. Ce qui nous amène à la contribution que le Premier ministre a annoncée vendredi dernier. The Prime Minister has proposed 6 CF-18 strike aircraft as the centerpiece of our contribution, thereby opting for a Canadian combat role. This leads to the obvious question, has the Canadian mission been clearly and fully defined? The answer is no. Defining a mission is much more than stating what assets we will contribute and then establishing a deadline. Going to war is an extraordinarily complex undertaking. You have to think it through. Let me give you an example. When George W. Bush invaded Iraq in 2003, he only thought out step one, which was to capture Baghdad. After that, what? Well, we saw what happened because of the failure to understand the overall challenge. At this moment, the United States will lead in this coalition effort, and it's still working out an overall coalition strategy to defeat ISIL. This is the job given to General Allen. It's an extremely complex undertaking which rests on the assumption that Iraqi forces must eventually dislodge and defeat ISIL in a ground campaign. Should Canada be rushing in with an air combat mission? The answer is no. In the end, when you're talking about a combat role, getting in seems very straightforward. Getting out is much less so. The right approach is certainly not to say that Canada will go into Iraq with strike aircraft but may pull out in 6 months. The right approach is to give the most careful consideration to our objectives before we send our men and women into harm's way. That has not been done by this government. But there is something that we can do at this time. There are significant, substantial, non-combat roles that Canada can play. And to suggest that unless you are contributing to a combat role that your contribution has no value is offensive to me. There are many as 60 coalition partners in the coalition, and each has chosen to contribute in its own way to the defeat of ISIL, whether by providing weapons, base facilities, strategic airlift, humanitarian aid, surveillance and other intelligence, or advice and training. All this to say there are many different ways to contribute, and they are all important. Last Friday, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "When it comes to sharing the burden of military intervention, the sacrifice that counts lies in the willingness to take casualties. Being a free rider means that you are not taken seriously." End of quote. I really object to that comment. It implies that you are taking the easy way out if you choose to contribute to the war effort in other ways. Est-ce que le Premier ministre a vraiment dit vendredi dernier que le Canada ne serait pas pris au sérieux s'il contribuait à la coalition par des moyens autres qu'une mission de combat par frappe aérienne? Est-ce que la majorité des partenaires de cette coalition sont moins engagés, ou pour utiliser le mot du Premier ministre, moins nobles, parce qu'ils choisissent de contribuer à la défaite de l'État islamique par d'autres moyens? Let me say that I also dispute the Prime Minister's assertion that airstrikes are the hard thing to do, and his implication by extension that other roles are easy or require less courage. It is hard work on the ground to train and advise forces, to help refugees, to provide medical aid, undertake air surveillance, provide strategic airlift, and provide humanitarian aid. While these tasks are not combat roles, they are still important tasks, many needing to be performed by our military. I would also challenge his assertion that we're somehow abandoning our allies if we opt out of airstrikes. Nobody has accused Canada of not pulling its weight in the past 20 years, or indeed during the entire period that we have been a country. Ultimately, defeating ISIL will only happen on the ground, and there are important non-combat contributions that Canada can make in this effort. Mr. Speaker, let me conclude. There is a clear line between non-combat and combat. If the Prime Minister wants to take us in Canada across that line, he must make the case to Canadians as to why. The Prime Minister has not given us reason to believe that once in combat, the government will be able to limit our role. Once you cross the line into combat, as the government is doing, it is no simple matter to cross back over, and we all know this conflict is likely to last a long time. Deciding in 6 months to pull out of combat could be very problematic for Canada, depending on the situation, and the pressure will be on us to remain. That is why the Liberal Party of Canada will not support the Prime Minister's motion to take on a combat role in Iraq. Saying we'll review in 6 months is not an exit strategy. We have the capabilities to meaningfully assist in a non-combat role, a well-defined international mission in Iraq. Il y a d'autres options que les deux extrêmes. L'extrême qui ne veut aucun rôle militaire et celui qui veut que le Canada se précipite la tête première dans le combat sans avoir compris toutes les conséquences. Monsieur le Président, il nous appartient de prendre la bonne décision lorsque nous voterons sur cette mission. Merci.